When you take away things that trigger your immune system, people feel better, flares get better, people get less activity of their diseases physically and clinically, and also it's to prevent future illnesses as well for people who are otherwise well.
I am so excited to have Dr. Aly Cohen. She is a board-certified rheumatologist, integrative medicine specialist, and environmental health expert. She is recognized as one of the country's leading medical and legal experts in environmental health.
There was a study that was done by Harvard School of Public Health where they took 75 participants and they changed out their lunch for 2 weeks to just canned soup. And then they had the same participants had only homemade soup. Then they measured the BPA in urine. The clean soup people had a 1,100% difference. And what that means is, because it's a short half-life, that if you choose to swap out canned foods, you are going to lower your exposure, at least from that route of entry. So even a Mediterranean diet done well can still give you a large load of exposure to chemicals you may not want. You can have the perfect diet. They can still be inflammatory. They can still have pesticides and chemicals. And the fix for this, because I'm always thinking about the problem and also the solution, is
I am so excited to have a very special guest on the podcast today, Dr. Aly Cohen. She is a board-certified rheumatologist, integrative medicine specialist, and environmental health expert based in Princeton, New Jersey. She is recognized as one of the country's leading medical and legal experts in environmental health. And in 2015, she founded the Smart Human, an organization dedicated to educating the public and private institutions about environmental health concerns and practical solutions to minimize chemical exposures. Welcome. Thank you for having me. Of course. I mean, super interesting background and so important. My audience is super familiar with my obsession with these toxins, right? They know I did these labs that we chatted about briefly, but I would love just a little bit of a background. I haven't had a rheumatologist on the podcast, so I'm very excited. But how did you get to where you are today?
Well, that's a big question, and I'm going to try to keep it simple. So, I found rheumatologists because I found it was interesting back in the day, and learning about the immune system, thought it was physiologically phenomenal. So very intrigued by that. And then I learned about integrative medicine because I didn't feel that I was satisfied enough with Western training. And even to this day, of course, a lot of people are not satisfied with the training in terms of nutrition and environmental health. But then I went on to do a fellowship in integrative medicine with Dr. Andrew Weil and his team. And while learning through that program, I learned a lot about environmental chemicals, but it wasn't really until my dog became really sick. About 15 years ago, I was a young mom. I had 2 little kids, and my firstborn was my golden retriever, Truxton. And he became ill, and we just thought he swallowed a sock or something else that Goldens eat. And turns out he had autoimmune hepatitis, which is an autoimmune disease that affects his liver. And he was only 4.5 years of age. So between the diagnosis being very strange for dogs and his age, I was heartbroken, and I started to explore his exposures. So what he drank, what he ate. We live on a farm in New Jersey. So I was worried about, any number of chemicals, including glyphosate, pesticides, even the red toy in his mouth. And the more I was trying to figure out what made him sick and triggered his immune system against itself, the more I was uncovering sort of the lack of regulation and oversight in human products, in human drinking water, in human food chemicals. And at the time, I was doing an environmental health survey and didn't realize it. And so fast forward 15 years, I get to put all of that training of those 3 specialties into play for my patients. And more importantly, to some degree, I'm hoping to educate many more people through the books and the curriculum I write, and high school students and that kind of thing.
I love that. So when you were in medical school, did they teach you about toxin exposures?
So I do not remember anything about toxin exposure. Now, mind you, that was 25 years ago. So it was a little bit longer than, but, just to give you some reference, even today when I've offered, upwards of 40 some hours of environmental health curriculum, which I'm already writing for physicians who are now training in that after all of their training. I mean, it's just it's crazy, but even med schools don't want this material because it's in the area of prevention, and most of what they teach to is symptoms and therapeutics, meaning pharmaceutical therapeutics. And so some very smart, very understanding, very interested deans of med schools have said no to even free curriculum, which I write for other programs, including University of California, Irvine. So the idea that they say they have no room. The question is really, you make room for what's important. And you have to kind of think about where the funding's coming from and where the emphasis really is. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but, it is what it is. We're not learning this material, and it's so critical to human health. The fact that we're not learning it and giving young doctors this information or even allied healthcare fields, it's just a real loss. It's a real shame to human, health and wellness.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's so interesting that you've offered it and they're not taking it. I mean, because in my opinion, and I interview hundreds of experts, like we think that, and you obviously do too. It's like it's probably one of the most concerning things to overall human health, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the more you know, the more it's critical that we figure this out. And it really just stems, as you know, from the fact that we don't regulate chemicals in the United States. In our products, in our personal care, cleaning, air quality issues with, any number of things we spray in the air. But we have such limited regulation. The fact that we now have such incredible, robust studies from around the world looking at the cellular effects from environmental chemicals. Certain classes have different effects, of course, is just remarkable because the data and information is there. I've written a textbook with Fred von Saal, who essentially, him and his colleagues began the work on endocrine disruption research and got baby bottles, BPA out of baby bottles. But that was it for BPA. I mean, we have it in everything still, not just in plastic baby bottles. So just the idea that it's so pervasive, it so affects our cellular health, it affects our risk for developing any number of acute and chronic illnesses. And the fact that we can make changes, which is what I write about, mostly the solutions,
Mm.
to essentially change the destiny of your health is pretty remarkable. And we know that we can do that. We can't always change everything, but we know that we can change, lifestyle, diet, and, certainly exposures in many ways.
Okay, so from a high level, just for anyone that's unaware of the actual problem before we dig into the solution, so can you speak to some of the stats about regulation in other countries versus here? How many things are regulated, how many aren't? So we understand like broad, big picture what we're
Yeah,
talking about.
a lot of it depends on which part of our products that we're talking about. So in the United States, we basically have no regulation on food chemicals. In the 1958, essentially, we started to really require, at least ask people who were making products that were going into food, chemicals. At that time we had vinegar and salt. I mean, that was really our food ingredients, our food additives. But at that time, they started the ball rolling to at least have some information from manufacturers about what went into the food in the U.S. public. But it never fully panned out. What they did create was something called GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, as a designation for and grandfathered in essentially thousands of chemicals that otherwise didn't need to be newly tested. It still doesn't hold up in terms of GRAS recognition or designation in terms of any new chemicals that come into the market, because it does not require manufacturers who come up with these compounds for taste, for preservatives, for crunch, for coloring, to explain themselves in any reasonable way in terms of actual studies on not just animal studies, but human studies, and particularly to make sure that our most vulnerable populations, pregnant women, children, the elderly, immune compromised people, are the most sensitive to many of these health effects, and really looking out to see if there's effects on those populations. So from the food industry perspective, we have over 12,000 generally recognized as safe food additives, which really haven't really cut it in terms of testing. Now, in Europe, it turns out that they do more rigorous testing. They also have a division between who does the testing and who does the management. In the United States, those two components, testing and management, is all done by the FDA, and Food and Drug Administration. So the idea that that body is making all of the decisions instead of two separate bodies that have their own scientific training, their own scientific background, and basically can balance bias a little bit better. We don't have that in the United States for food. What I do talk a lot about in what I do and what I teach is a lot about the organic standards in the United States, and the fact that it is basically all we have in terms of regulation for food to make it cleaner. And under that regulation, thousands of pesticides and fertilizer chemicals are not allowed to be sprayed on that food or the soil to be mixed with those chemicals, no genetically modified ingredients. It started around 1990 when they got into organic, the process, and it wasn't until about 2002, I believe. So a good 10 years before it hit the market. Is it perfect? No, it's not a perfect system. But it is the best we have. Certainly, non-organic food can be washed. We can use baking soda and white vinegar, and I teach that in the book because I want to hit every social and economic demographic. Because we want to be able to have access to things like fruits and vegetables that don't have necessarily organic labeling. When it comes to cosmetics and personal care products, there's even fewer oversights and regulations, which is hard to believe because 0 is 0.
Right.
But in Europe, again, they have a much more rigorous process by which they manage the chemicals that go into those products for cleaning and for personal care. It's upwards of about 1,200 chemicals that we use that they do not use at this point in terms of those general products. So it's a problem, and once you know the problem, we can do better. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, they might as well just drop the F and it just might as well be the DA, right? Because they're doing nothing with the food, essentially.
Yeah, and look, there's issues across the board, even amongst medical, pharmaceutical testing and who gets the data, and we had issues across the board. It's not a perfect system, but that has been the message from me is really you have to do it yourself. Because even when, we have a win, like, red dye number 3 makes a lot of news and gets taken out. Well, we also have blue 6 and yellow, this and red dye number 40, and we have lots of other chemicals. If we waited for every one of these chemicals to be removed when we know there's harm or even enough data to precautionarily take them away, we wouldn't be here. This wouldn't be the generation we're talking to. And my argument is really that we don't have time to waste. We have to do this ourselves, and here are the tools to do it.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes people ask me and I'm like, oh, I avoid all of these X things and I avoid seed oils. I would love your opinion on seed oils, actually. Very hot debate all the time. And, people are saying like, well, look at the literature. It says that seed oils are safe. I'm like, okay, well, all that I need to do is watch the video as to how that they're made and know some of the additives inside of this product to just have a common sense reaction that I'll probably avoid it and go with something like a little bit more natural. But what do you think about seed oils?
So this is not an area of study that I spent a lot of time on, so I want to just full disclosure. But my general feeling is sticking to very narrow but high quality not vegetable, but olive oil, almond oil, things that have been shown to be less inflammatory overall.
Oh, yeah.
But your point about manufacturing, I think, is really interesting, and I talk about this in the book. You can have the perfect diet. Mediterranean, anti-inflammatory, some of the most, best studies that have been done have been on blue zones, Mediterranean, whole fresh foods, that kind of thing. My thoughts are that, and actually some studies that you put in the book, is that if they're not clean products, even if they're produce, they can still be inflammatory. They can still have pesticides and chemicals. So even a Mediterranean diet done well could still give you a large load of exposure to chemicals you may not want. And the fix for this, because I'm always thinking about the problem and also the solution, is I want people to really think closely about frozen USDA organics because they maintain a lot of nutritional value in our food system, which is really wrought with a lot of problems, including distance for things to travel or low temperature refrigerators. Those products lose nutritional value the longer that they're not from pick to ground and into our belly. And so frozen USDA organics are a really great way to democratize some really healthy food, choices, because every big box store in the country really carries their own line of USDA organics now. I spend a ridiculous amount of time in the supermarket looking at pricing, looking at what's available to almost anyone that can, try to search for these things. And it turns out that this has become such a lucrative business that we are now finding USDA organics in Target, in stores that are really everywhere.
Yeah.
And it has the added value of not only having that designation of USDA organic, but it also has, again, all of that flash frozen nutritional value that I think people really need. In fact, I talk about that in the book. It's not just a thing to remove chemicals. you have the third A in my 4 A's, which we can talk about, but the third A is add, and adding is the nutritional component that actually has been part of the human diet for millions of years. So that's a really big one of the many adds that we can add in, but that certainly is one of them is nutrition.
Yeah, I mean, so I do, another test, and we'll talk about, this is what I do. So I do a ton of testing. I do another test called a Nutri-Eval, which like gives you a nutrient status. So, but we see these, all the time, and it's just nutrient levels are just so depleted, even if people are eating a healthy diet because of what you just said. It's like the depletion of the soil, and then how far is your food traveling, and just the degradation of nutrients, which is so sad. But that's a great point. Is these frozen foods. To go back to autoimmune for a second, so this is obviously like a really incredibly prevalent issue. I'm not even being hyperbolic when I tell you like almost every single person that I meet, and people tell me more health information than probably the average person would because it's my world, but almost everybody is like experiencing some sort of autoimmune condition. This feels very not normal to me. It feels like a huge red flag. Um, what's your thoughts on this? Like, what have you seen? Talk to people about what an autoimmune condition even is, and why do you think it's rising so precipitously? And we also know that women have about 80% of these autoimmune conditions, right?
Yeah, and so I have a section in the book that goes into more detail than I'll probably share here because it's complicated. But I do, like, first of all, it's there's no question that there's an epidemic rise of immune and autoimmune diseases in the United States and around the world. We're a global world now. And the difference between immune and autoimmune is that autoimmune, really, your immune system is directing its activity towards self, towards the body itself. Like my dog, autoimmune hepatitis, attacking his own liver. There's autoimmune diseases of the brain, like multiple sclerosis. There's autoimmune diseases of the gut, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. There's autoimmune diseases of the joints. Of course, I deal with a lot, rheumatoid, psoriatic arthritis. And then there's immune conditions where your body is sort of reacting to perhaps things outside the body. So it could be dermatitis, psoriasis, eczema, allergies, food allergies. So these are things that are sort of directed towards things coming into the body. Either way you look at it, it's an immune stimulation that we're seeing quite a bit of. And this is really parallels the literature that we're seeing in the medical literature that there's a rise in these conditions. And in many ways, it's a rise and parallels the growth and expansion of chemicals in our environment and what we use in terms of products, what we eat, and our drinking water quality. So in the U.S., there's about 7 to 14% of the U.S. That has some type of autoimmune disease. That's about 24 to 30 million Americans. And it's not because we're getting better diagnosing. A lot of people might say, oh, we're just smarter doctors at diagnosing. I would kind of argue that because we only have 15 minutes with patients at conventional Western medicine programs, right? This is what most of us are served by. And in that time, there's very little time to ask about lifestyle and diet and exposures and what water you drink and what food you eat and, and kind of, make an impact in terms of those changes. So the fact that we have this rise in autoimmune diseases and the fact that, as I make a point in the book, we're seeing this in younger generations, and we're seeing this in people with no family history of that particular illness, either MS or rheumatoid or lupus. And it really goes to the point that our exposures from environment, and that's a lot of different things, environmental health, and not just chemicals. It's poor sleep, right? It's stress, it's light pollution, it's noise pollution, it's drinking water, it's cosmetics. So we need to be thinking about why we're so immersed in these chemicals. We do know because we like products, but how do we get out of it? And as I show with some of the cases in the book and some of my patients, when you take away things that trigger your immune system, when you take out the exposures, and I call them immune disrupting chemicals, as opposed to just endocrine disrupting chemicals that we know a lot about, immune disrupting chemicals is just framing the same story and a lot of different data towards why we have immune diseases. But when you understand those exposures, the fact that we have these conditions, people are sick, it makes you want to make changes. And with patients that I show how I go about thinking through what they're exposed to, how do we make lifestyle changes in real distinct ways, in real, directed ways, people feel better, flares get better, people get less, activity of their diseases physically and clinically. And also it's to prevent future illnesses as well for people who are otherwise well.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts why women are experiencing this at such higher rates?
Yeah, so we know that about, as you mentioned, there's a higher rate of women having autoimmune diseases in general, particularly lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and MS among them. There are a bunch of autoimmune diseases, including diabetes type 1 and Ehlers-Danlos. Well, that's more mixed connected, but type 1 diabetes is more across the board, male and female, it's equal. And then when you look at male dominant autoimmune diseases, you're really talking more ankylosing spondylitis and psoriatic arthritis. Now, that being said, um, there's a lot of really interesting research that I mentioned in the book, including, new gene findings called the exist gene that really show that there are changes in the male female genes in terms of the XY chromosome versus XX in women that really start to show why women at the genetic level may be more prone. And that's one example of a theory. Estrogen certainly is another that's been well studied, and particularly because many autoimmune diseases in women that are predominant occur during pregnancy years or when women are menstruating, sort of like late, mid to late teens all the way through to menopause. So the estrogen theory is certainly very plausible. The gene theory now is really interesting. And it may be also from an environmental health standpoint that we are experiencing more exposures in general by women who use more products. We know that with personal care products for sure, but also they are often more exposed when it comes to household cleaning and other things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. I haven't heard about the gene theory, so that's super interesting. So the genes are actually changing as they came up?
So if I remember this correctly, because I've been traveling, but it's, basically there's a way where when the human body is being formulated in utero, there is, an imbalance between the XY and the XX chromosomes. To make men, you kind of have to knock off an X chromosome. They're the XY. And there's a loss of RNA. RNA basically transitioned to even out the genetic makeup, essentially. So, in other words, there's a problem with evening out the gene pool in terms of what's available, and that loss essentially can be recreated in mice. So they're seeing that when they look at mice who had this genetic problem, that they are more prone to developing lupus, and that's who they tested, what they tested it in mostly. But essentially, it's a problem turning off genes, essentially. Now, what's so interesting, in my opinion, about that information, which comes from very classic labs, which I love, is that why are we having that problem? And, we know that generational, and this is just me talking, but there's generationally, we have changes to our gene expression from exposomic changes from many of these chemicals. And we can see that histone changes and DNA methylation problems. So it's never to blame mothers. It's never to blame parents. It's really to say every time you make a change in your life, whether you plan to have kids or not, your exposures can play out in successive generations. And I think that goes with obviously medical history as well. But you also have an opportunity to improve your epigenetics too. That had a really key point to all of this, is that we can actually have beneficial changes that keep, genes from expressing themselves into disease just simply by lifestyle and exposures.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful.
We're going to take a brief pause from the episode so I can tell you a little bit more about the company that me and my husband own, Heavenly Eat Sauce. As you know, we have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in longevity technology, therapies, and protocols. And by far and away, the science supports sauna for being one of the most science-backed longevity practices. 4 or more sauna sessions per week can actually decrease your risk of all-cause mortality by up to 40%. It can also decrease your risk of a cardiovascular event by about 50% and reduce your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's by about 60%. I use my Heavenly sauna 4 to 7 times per week.
It's not just about the therapy of sauna itself, it's also about the quality of your sauna. Heavenly Heat Saunas is the cleanest sauna brand on the market. I searched and researched for years to find this brand. We didn't actually found it, but we do own it now because these saunas were originally made to be for people with chemical sensitivity. So no VOCs in the chamber. It's made with no glues, no polyurethanes, no varnishes, and the heaters are even Faraday caged. So it also has the lowest EMFs on the market. If you're interested in purchasing a Heavenly Heat sauna, I have a code and it's code Kayla. We also recently rolled out red light panels that are incredible for skin health, mitochondrial function, and so much more. Now back to our episode. Have you seen, like, with any of your patients, like, are autoimmune conditions reversible in some cases?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I talk about patients. Now, reversible is a really tricky word. It's almost like remission in cancers. It's almost like remission is quiet until we get a reoccurrence. I think you could almost say the same thing to some degree, depending on which autoimmune disease and how much damage has been done, right? You can't make tissue entirely come back to life or be more functional all the time. But you can certainly quiet down the exposures that have continuously triggered the body into being active. And when we are actively having an immune problem, immune response, you're using vital energy that the human body would like to conserve. You are also potentially using up services of your body's, chemistry that you don't want to use either. Enzymes and inflammation and redness these are all parts of our inflammatory response. So the short answer, well, that was a long answer, but the short answer is yes, people do, and I've written about these patients. There's no question that their flares come down. There's no question that they stay off medicines potentially. And I like medicines as a tool, but not the first reactive reflexive tool. And that's the integrative medicine training, of course. And there's no doubt that people do better when they remove things that clearly inflame the human body.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into what those things are. Like, what are some of the common, you think worst offenders? You mentioned some labs that you have in the book that we could maybe touch on, and then we'll get into practical solutions for people.
Yeah. So some of the worst offenders really depends on what you value most in terms of your exposure. So, for instance, from a food perspective, I think some of the worst offenders really come from the food packaging that also carries our food. So it's not just ultra processed foods, standard American diet. We know the more processed, the more potential for those chemicals that have not been, tested with any significance, generally regarded as recognized as safe additives. So switching to less processed foods certainly will cut down an enormous load of exposure to many harmful chemicals. Switching to organic can be very, very helpful. But then food packaging is so interesting because canned foods, for instance, even organic,
Mm-hmm.
um, by its design, canned foods are interior wise are coated with an epoxy resin, which is plastic, and that is bisphenol A, and it's still BPA, right? We think it's out of baby bottles, but that's the only place that it's been removed. And often, if this says BPA free on any product or any packaging, it's often with a regrettable substitution, meaning a BPS, BPSIP, BPF. And so that's kind of a whack-a-mole around the problem with bisphenols as a class, because functionally they're plastics and they're used for a lot of things. So I think about canned foods and switching to frozens. I think about, of course, fresh foods when farmers markets in the East Coast, we have them now again. And or growing some of your own food, which is, doesn't take up that much space. But you kind of have to want to do that and have the time and effort to do that. And I relate to that. From other chemicals that we know we're getting exposed to now, just
The quick question, real fast, about the organic and conventional. So, how do you feel with the environmental working group like Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen if someone can't, get all organic?
So it's in the book. I'm a fan of all tools and resources. Is anything perfect? No, they draw from farmers' data from the USDA across the country in terms of the data, and that's really just the testing of the residues on conventional fruits and vegetables to give us a nice list of which are the dirtiest, which are the highest levels. Typically, it's fruits with skins like berries and peaches and that kind of thing, versus the clean 15, which tend to be more of the skinned fruits like pineapple. I should say not skin, but kind of a hard outer core. So watermelon, pineapple, kiwi, those kind of things. Although asparagus seems to rate pretty low in terms of residues every year, even if it's conventional, which I like to hear. So it's a very, very helpful tool. Environmental Working Group, I think, is a fabulous organization. And, they're a consumer advocacy group. There's also other resources like, looking up products on Clearia is a great app, Yucca, Think Dirty. There's organizations that you can look at for greensciencepolicy.org is in the book. We have tons of resources when you look up perfluoroalkyl products. I don't share products because of the academic work I do. So I like people to have resources that where they keep up with that information. It's evergreen and they're on top of those exposure issues in those products that they like. So that's another area is the EWG. Is there just another resource that I like? Is a perfect no, and I'm very clear about that. They're doing great work that no one else is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, okay. So love that. And I would love to resume.
So in terms of exposures, we talk about food, we talk about food packaging a bit. Getting rid of plastics seems very easy and accessible now. Glass, stainless steel, a cast iron is a very reasonable way to switch out plastics. Using water bottle, getting coffee in stainless steel instead of resorting to coffee cups, which we know, any paper products are going to be, soggy if they didn't have plastic. Listen, I'm saying this all with, colored hair. My kid's playing lacrosse right now in New Jersey on toxic turf. So, we have to be reasonable about messaging. But these are things that we can, aspire to and not always think that it has to be done today, right now.
Yeah.
Other exposures, and I talk about water a lot. Right. It has become one of my biggest issues in terms of human health. I think it's very underrated and under talked about. But water, getting is just a simple water filter. I do not, poo-poo anyone who filters with any finding, whether it's a pitcher or a sink or a fridge, those are carbon block versus the kind that I have in my office and at home, which is reverse osmosis, because the material is just the pore size is so small, it's catching everything.
Yeah.
It just takes longer to make that water because it has to do it very slowly to get through all this surface area. But I do encourage people to really think about filtering their water in any way they can. Certainly, reverse osmosis has come down in price over the last several decades. I talk about my father a lot, who's a kidney specialist. He's 85 and still practicing, and they require reverse osmosis water in huge tanks from the 1970s, which is not that long ago, 50 years ago when we got dialysis units and kidneys, artificial kidneys. And that water is required for dialysis patients to use the machines. And they did that because the pore size is so small, it would catch single-celled organisms, so viruses and bacteria, so that these immune-compromised folks, which all dialysis patients really are by definition, would not get sick. What was so interesting is 50 years later, we have thousands of commercial chemicals, solvents, bisphenols, that, PFAS chemicals, metals, that get caught in that same material because they're bigger than the single-celled organisms. So RO filters are now really accessible for $275. Plumber in our house, to put it in, a plumber costs $150 for 1 hour. And so I really push people to think about the economics. I write about a whole chapter on water and how to get those accessible systems.
Yeah, it's really wild. I mean, again, if you go to the EWG and look up your local tap water database, it's just like, this is just, in my opinion, like straight poison.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't know until you know. And, when you know, you want to do better. And, because it all stems from a law from 1974 called the Safe Drinking Water Act, which has still been in effect for 50 years with no changes, aside from a potential, 4 or 6 PFAS chemicals that might be added to the list of 91 chemicals that have, only been required to be managed and remediated if they're, found at all of the wastewater treatment plants, which is about 160,000. that serve 86% of the US population. So, if you have a law that hasn't moved, it's still at 91 chemicals that it manages, and we've had thousands since then. The infrastructure to change that system out to keep up with all of the chemicals that are being produced. It's like 15 new polymers a week are being patented, 1,000 per year are added to our environment. It's pretty daunting. You're never going to necessarily, catch anything at any given time. So you want to catch water when it hits your home, no matter if it comes from a well or it comes from a wastewater treatment plant, you're going to fix it at the point of use, which is right before you drink it. But it's a pretty remarkable conversation. And, when I showed pictures, I think in my last book, I'm not sure if I have it in this book, the pictures of my change outs for my reverse osmosis, it's like mud. It's really pretty filthy stuff that, every 3 to 6 months you change it out and you can see what you're not putting in your body. Um, it's like a visual that you don't forget.
Yes,
So,
I agree. Well, yeah, I have RO systems too, and then even air filtration too, right? I mean, like when you when you swap the air filter, it's so like gratifying because yeah, you're like, oh, good, thank goodness all that didn't go into my lungs and into my body.
yeah, absolutely. And especially around LA, I did a lot of conversations about the air quality post fires. And, there's a lot we can do in our home. Certainly, we can't always create, my colleagues and people I know work in New York City and Philadelphia, and I'm on the East Coast, like you can't always control the world around you. But you control what you put on your body in terms of masking. You can control your home in terms of, air quality, in terms of MERV filters in your HVAC system for people who have central air and heating. If you raise the MERV level to 13 instead of, the default of 5 to 9, you're really making possibly a good dent in the air quality. Even air filters, learning about the CADR level, which is the continuous air delivery rate, which is how these air filters work in homes and businesses, is, matching up the CADR of, I'll give you the numbers, 300 CADR for every 500 square feet. And that's a pretty good number to aim for when it comes to the quality of your air filter. So there's lots we can do. It's a shame we have to do this.
Yeah.
Like I said, I live in the real world with everyone listening. I color my hair. These are a choice. These are risk benefit ratios we all make every day. But if you have the opportunity to layer in these changes over time, I mean, it's a journey for everybody. But if you layer them over time, it really makes a lot of good sense. And we have a 21-day plan I put together. I say we, like me and my cat. But he and I put together a really good plan, and it's really for those who are starting at any place along this journey. It's like day 1, day 2, day 3. By 21 days, you got it. You got a good head start on a very difficult topic, but you also know why you're doing it. I want people to know the why in order to do the what.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important because it can be like a full-time job, right? Like just trying to figure out. I mean, now I'm like at the point where a lot of, I mean, even, this room, we can't do too much about the walls, but like the rug is organic. And inside the house, I don't have rugs. I do like non-toxic cleaning products and try to do like even couches. It's wild. Like trying to find like a lower toxin couch. It's just, and you wouldn't even think that couches would be, well, you could look at the labels. Yeah, well, there you go. So, like, added in all this stuff inside of mattresses and couches and clothing, and it can be overwhelming.
Oh, it is overwhelming. I get overwhelmed, and I've been doing this work for a long time. And, I was on the ledge in the beginning when I didn't understand how this could all be happening. And now, when you have kids and you're busy, you start to understand how to live with the problem. Because if you can't change at the regulatory and governmental level, you're just a work in progress through your own life and your own environments. And I think that's okay. But, I don't think people should be giving up if it's too overwhelming. I think you have to tiptoe into the process. I always start with high yield changes. To me, it makes the most sense to not be concerned about going to a birthday party and you had purple icing. Big deal. You traveled. I have to grab plastic water bottles when I travel because I don't always have access of a filter to fill up my stainless steel container, So there's things we make choices and have to manage. But when I come home, I do better. I sauna, because I put in a sauna. I run more. I love to exercise, and I think that that's a great physiologic way. to reduce chemicals, flood the liver with great, blood flow for enzyme reactions that help detoxify. I'll do better when I get home, but I think we all need to balance our fear and our concern and put that great energy into the doing and doing it over time. That makes sense to us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we talked about some of the ways to like reduce exposures. What are your thoughts on fragrances?
Well, it's interesting. So I grew up with and some people can relate. Drakkar was the guy's thing. Everybody smelled like Drakkar. We were like, woo, and opium and God, eternity. Gosh, who didn't wear eternity? It's funny. Fragrances bring you back to certain times in your life. They make you feel nostalgic. They bring you back to people that wore them. But in all reality, unfortunately, these chemicals are not so good for us. They're made with a lot of chemicals called phthalates, or just one component that makes scent last longer, make them have a longer shelf life, right? We all want to smell with our perfume. If you're going to wear it, you want it to last all day. You don't want it to just wear off. The big trick with the new perfumes coming out, which, by the way, I like a lot of them, the ones that are technically non-toxic, is they don't last that long.
Yeah.
But we're at the beginning of this process because we didn't have a lot of makeup 10 years ago that was clean totally. And we've gotten a lot better in terms of the markets and how good these products work. Just an anecdotal story. I had two sons, and one of them was 15 at the time when he and his friends like barter cologne. I mean, this is like a thing. Like, I'm happier it's not like, drums, right? So I'm like, okay, this is the drug of choice for them. So they're like hustling, and they're all comparing their colognes, and they're buying expensive colognes. And I said to my son, number one, let's do EWG Skin Deep database. And let's, if you want to meet the ladies, get the ladies at summer camp, whatever. You can get products, you can buy them, but they have to be rated like a 2 or a 1. I give a little leeway. And then I said to him, there are some clean colognes out there that I think you might like. So we ordered actually from one company a little sample pack, which had like 6 different spray bottles, and you could decide. And we sat and we did like a cologne testing. It was like a unisex fragrances.
Yeah.
And it was just a really nice little moment for us and a learning experience for him. And we both got a cologne from what we picked out, and he told all his friends. And I just think that ripple effect, being involved with kids, particularly the kids that are hitting the teenage years, really big time for products,
Totally.
big endocrine disruption and immune disruption area from just having so many hormones going, which I talk about in my TED Talk. But the idea is that it was such a hands-on moment for him to learn. And I see him looking it up all the time, Dimitri, yeah. So it's good, you want to, and I teach this to my high school students. So it works.
Well, I love that tip too, because I don't have any children yet, but my husband and I, we just got married like almost 2 years ago now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But we're going to start trying. And, everybody asks this question. It's like, I've done so much work and I'm so meticulous with things, but when kids come into the picture, they're going to have like a mind of their own and free will. So it's good to hear you just like said, hey, you could pick anything from the AWG that's 1 to 2. Because it gets
Having them choice, right? It's kind of like I learned very quickly that you don't go in and say, what do you want for breakfast?
Yeah.
You said, here's what we have for breakfast. Here's what would you like?
That's nice.
And that kind of changed everything for me. So I think when it comes in, I think I can say enough about parenting. I have 2 boys now that are old enough to probably fly the coop very soon. It's about partnering with your kids as opposed to sort of dominating, in my experience. They come to me with questions and information I would never have imagined, because I'm trying to keep the doors open in terms of just not being judgmental. And I think I treat my patients the same way. And I hopefully if you have healthcare practitioners like yourself and, listening, it's about partnering. I don't even wear a white coat. Like, it's really about saying to someone, we're together on these decisions. Let's do the best we can. I may know some information that you don't know, but certainly it's your body. So I think those are kind of things that play into even parenting.
Yeah. I love that approach though too, because obviously not all, medical professionals are of that mindset. It's more like it's a one-way directional conversation.
Design that way.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think when, you're kind of filling in as almost like a coach, right? Like you're helping them, but you know all these great things. But I think people's buy-in is a lot better then too.
They're what?
Their buy-in, like their excitement about doing things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's human nature is you don't want to be told what to do. Yeah, you really do want to have options and then you choose the best one. I mean, the best therapy in the world is the one where you don't come to the conclusion from your therapist, you come to it on your own.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just a lot about what I've learned in clinical medicine that I'm still learning with my patients. And one of the things, having done all kinds of medicine, including the white coat and the computer and standing a foot or two above them, it's all designed to be a hierarchy. I'm not saying it's entirely a problem, but it hasn't been the way it's worked for me and my clientele in terms of how I teach and what I want to share. So, I feel like people are just much more receptive to change when you're partnering with them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about bioaccumulation.
Yeah.
So what is your thoughts on that? Like, can we actually detox? So I'm doing like a lot of these advanced therapies, but they're not realistic whatsoever to really like do for most people. So I tried like plasmapheresis and then I should like had before and after results. But can all these chemicals be detoxed? What are some of the most effective strategies for things like that?
It depends on the chemicals, interestingly enough. So, this is how you take thousands of chemicals and you divide them up. So, you could divide them up by how fast they break down. Is it 6 to 8 hours like BPA and a lot of the bisphenols, or is it like months and years like perfluoroalkyls, the PFAS chemicals, which there are about 15,000 of those at this point. You can also divide up chemicals by classes of function, right? Are they stain guard? Are they plastic chemicals? Are they designed to do any number of functional things, like solvents or, resist heat or something of that sort? And then you have the way to designate chemicals by what they hurt, right?
Yeah.
Neurotoxin, liver toxin, because we know that's how they've been deemed from that framework. But the fact of the matter is a lot depends on two things: the host and the chemical. And I have a great slide that I show a lot of doctors. And the idea is that the host has their own factors, like whether or not their kidneys are working and their liver's working and their age group. Vulnerable populations are young kids, pregnant women, and elderly, because their immune system may not be working as strong. Their detoxification pathways in children certainly are not as well formed and up to snuff. So kids are particularly vulnerable to the health effects of these chemicals. And then so the host issues are one thing, and then you have the chemical and its half-life, and it's where it's stores at muscle. Muscle, likes to hold on to, say, for instance, mercury, and that's how we get it from fish. It's in their meat. Versus, say, lead likes to hang out in bone. So when you do bone broth, you have to be very careful about bone broth and boiling the hell out of bone broth. You're also going to release what's ever stored in that bone. So that's a factor. Also, the chemical itself, whether it, again, breaks down as a short-term chemical or a long-term. And what I mean by that in terms of practicality is, for instance, there was a study that was done by Harvard School of Public Health where they took 75 participants and they just regular people, and they changed out their lunch to for 2 weeks to just canned soup. They used Progresso, believe it or not. It was actually in the study.
Oh, wow.
And so for 2 weeks, these 75 participants changed nothing out their lives except for their lunch was this can of soup from Progresso. And then they had a 3-day washout, technically no canned soup. And then they had the same participants had only, clean, no canned food, canned soup. It was just like homemade soup.
Yeah.
With no chemical products from the packaging or anything of that sort. And then they measured the BPA in urine, which is how it's generally measured. And it turns out that the clean soup people had a 1,100% difference.
Wow.
Than the people who had Progresso soup every day, just one can for 2 weeks. And that was 1,100% difference. And what that means is, because it's a short half-life, that if you choose to swap out canned foods, for instance, as one of many changes that I suggest in the book, you are going to lower your exposure, at least from that route of entry, because we get BPA in other ways, actually, but not as much as we do from ingestion. You're going to change the chemistry of your body. Potentially change the chemistry or the destiny of your health. So that's just one group of chemicals that you can get out of your system. Perfluoroalkyls wash out as well. Heavy metals can wash out. There's lots of different ways that the body rids itself of chemicals. Liver is just one of many organs. We have the lymphatic system, we have the kidneys, we have our skin when we exercise and sweat. So there's just it's arguably very variable between the host and the chemicals, but we also have lots of chemicals. So it's not like any one chemical is what we can hang our hat on. It's more about doing the big picture and assuming that that's going to reduce a lot of exposures. And
Sulforaphane or like high fiber diets.
yeah, absolutely. Great point. So I have a whole chapter on AD, which is, I'll just say quickly, the 4 A's is assess. The second A for environmental health and navigation is avoid or swap, which we talked a lot about here. The third A is add, which brings into not just sweating and good quality sleep for the lymphatic system to remove chemicals while we sleep, but to add in clean drinking water, clean food, but also the certain nutrients. We have data now that shows that specific nutrients offset methylation issues from exposures to BPA, heavy metals, such as quercetin, vitamin Z, omega-3 fatty acids, if they're done well.
Yeah.
That's a whole issue, and I talk about it in the book. Certain nutrients like folic acid or methylfolate, which is vitamin B9. There's so much data that shows that what we eat, food is medicine, but it also plays a big role in this blocking of environmental chemicals that you may or may not have control over. You're actually eating to offset chemical changes. And that's a big part of the third A, which is add. The fourth A is allow, which brings into my hair coloring and travel and my kids on the lacrosse field and my kids' cologne and, oh gosh, a lot of my kids, so I better get to work. But that allow is to give people pause and say, we could do this, regroup, do it slowly, do it at a pace you can live with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important because in relation to health, there's so many things you can do. It can be definitely overwhelming. So thank you for writing a book to break it all down for us.
My pleasure.
So this has been an amazing conversation. Where can people find you? Where can they get your book?
Thank you so much. The book is available online, Amazon. I'm available. I'm in Princeton, New Jersey, but I do telemedicine. So I have a very small practice, but small but mighty. And also online, I am under the smarthuman.com is my website. I have courses. I do a couple courses, actually several now. I have pesticides, I have drinking water. I have a bunch of stuff there.
Great.
But people can follow on Instagram, The Smart Human, or Aly Cohen MD is my new handle too as well. So I'm building other aspects to educate.
I love that. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you. Make sure to link everything in the show notes. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, really.
Thank you.